You're listening to Sweep the League.
Hey, this is George Iceman Gervin, and you're listening to Sweep the League Radio.
So as promised, we are back here for Sweep the League. It's the second edition of Sweep the League, but a very special edition of Sweep the League. Earlier, Gio and I brought to you the regular Friday afternoon delight edition. This is the special NHL preview edition of Sweep the League. We're going to be joined by two very, very special guests. They are both hosts of the Best Boys podcast, Barry Besse and his son Carson Besse. They're going to be joining me here in just a second. Who are we previewing? Obviously, we're previewing Florida and Edmonton, the Oilers against the Panthers. We're going to let them break down this for all you NHL buffs out there. Let's go ahead and get them on here. This is the NHL preview of Sweep the League. Gentlemen,
right.
Carson, Barry, welcome to the show, man. Glad to have you guys on.
Thanks for having
me. Thanks for having us, Rudy. Really a pleasure to seeing you again and working with you again since you were on the air here at 9:30 a.m. The Answer.
Yeah, man, those were fun times, especially getting to work with the times that we did on the air. Hopefully, fingers crossed, one day we'll be able to work again on the airwaves because that was always fun.
Well, the studio's just down here, buddy. You can just come on down. It's just right here.
I'm gonna take you up on that. I got to get in the studio because that was always fun. And appreciate you, man. Appreciate you guys for joining on. We've got a 2024 Stanley Cup upon us. Edmonton against Florida, and from what if I'm not mistaken, Barry, you're an Edmonton fan. I think you're an Edmonton fan just by the shirt you're wearing.
Yeah, just a little bit. Well, I was, I'm originally from Canada, and I was born in northern Alberta, but I was raised about 30 miles south of Edmonton. So I was around in the whole time of the 80s, great Oiler teams that won 5 Stanley Cups. And I've been a fan of the team since before that, even in the 1970s when they were in the World Hockey Association. So yeah, I'm a diehard Oilers fan, going through the ups and the downs. And then I'm dragging my son along here too, Carson. But it's funny, he'll tell you the story about how he got involved in hockey. It wasn't really through me. I never pushed him into saying, hey, I want you to watch hockey. I want you to watch hockey. He's got a great story about how he got into hockey and being such a passionate and really, and you'll hear, and you've heard him before. He's probably, if not one of the best hockey analysts I've ever heard in my entire life. And I'm not just saying that because he's my son, but it's really true.
I don't doubt it, man. I listen to the Best podcast that y'all have, the Beast podcast y'all have, and it's amazing. I like listening to it when I'm working. Very informative, and I love it. I'm not much of a hockey guy. So when I watch,
I was trying to push that on you when you were here. When you go, yeah, let's talk football instead. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I'm an expansion fan. That's why earlier I told Gio that I went with the expansion Seattle Kraken, but I can't name one player from the Kraken. I just will support it, the team itself. But before that, I mean, you're talking. I kind of watched a little bit when Gretzky was in LA. That was obviously before he was in Edmonton, right? Beforehand.
It was after he was in Edmonton.
Yeah, after everybody started in Edmonton with Mark Messier. Is that another one?
Yeah, it was Mark Messier and Wayne Gretzky played together in Edmonton, along with greats, Hall of Famers like Glenn Anderson, Yari Curry, Grant Fuhr. The list goes on and on and on about hockey Hall of Famers that played on those. Oilers, Paul Coffey, who's now one of the assistant coaches of the Oilers. He played in there. There's a list of hockey Hall of Famers, and they all started their career in Edmonton.
Yeah, so I have a bet with Gio off air that said, he goes, you can't name 10 hockey players. And I said, all right, I'm going to get the boys on the podcast and see if I get these right. So we're going to do that bet before we get to the preview first. So you guys got to give me the check mark. So I named Gretzky, I named Messier. Patrick Waugh was another one?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, goalie.
Montreal Canadiens and Colorado Avalanche.
Yep.
Paul Correa, is that another one?
Yep, that's one.
Mighty Ducks, right? Play the Ducks. Okay. I gotta leave. Mario Lemieux. I remember Lemieux.
Yep.
Jaromir Jagr.
Yep.
Both with Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh. Those are both Pittsburgh. Jeez, I'm on 6. I'm trying to get Alex Ovechkin.
Yes. Washington.
Mm-hmm.
Sidney Crosby.
Yep. Pittsburgh.
PK Subban.
Yep. He played with New Jersey and
Connor McDavid.
Yep. There's 10. You got your 10.
There you go. That's 10, Brody. Yeah, all right.
All right, we hit the 10 mark, so now Gio owes me something. I'm gonna collect on that bet here pretty soon.
Now I want you to name all the players who have come from Slovenia.
Oh God.
Luka Doncic is one. He's technically in a final, so we can go with that right there. No, man, I'm joined by Barry and Carson of the Best Boys podcast. Great podcast. Take a look at it. Subscribe to their podcast. Everything NHL. It's very informative, especially with the with Lord Stanley Cup upon us. The game starts tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. Edmonton and Florida. So for guys that are into hockey, that know about hockey, and then you've got the guys that are kind of going to be recreationally watching it, like myself. What is the preview we can get for Edmonton versus Florida players to watch? I mean, is there storylines behind it? I'm going to let Carson take this with Barry, and then I'm going to come back to you on it. So, Carson, preview the Oilers-Panthers for us. Is there an absolute favorite? Is this going to be a mad dog fight? How is this going to go down?
So I'm going to tell you right now, there's no favorite, I don't think, in this series. This series is going to be very high-octane energy. Both teams are very offensively potent, can score a lot at any time. Last series, actually, the Panthers, who won the Eastern Conference, they defeated the regular season champions, if you want to say. The President's Trophy is what it called, the New York Rangers. The best team in the entire NHL in the regular season, and they beat them. It seemed like no problem. They outplayed them every step of the way. Their speed is unbelievable. Their goaltending is top tier. They probably have going in the playoffs, one of the top 3 goalies in the whole playoff right now. Defense wise, they've been locking it down. But I think this is going to be very just back and forth. There's not really going to be any lulls in entertainment or action throughout this whole series. Obviously, players-wise, you want to look for Edmonton, McDavid, number 97. He's the big market player, the best player in the league, and has been for years. He's by far the most entertaining player to watch in the league. Probably the fastest player in the league, but his ability just to knife through defense is uncanny. And then for Florida is going to be very interesting because as much as they're offensively potent, they have more guys on there that are willing to kind of mix it up a little bit and get their nose dirty. So they're not afraid to like go and lay hits or to just hit the best players on Edmonton to kill their offensive groove. But overall, this is going to be a very, very entertaining final. I personally think Edmonton's going to win, not just because the Oilers are Dad's team, but I mean, we've watched the playoffs. I've seen the season. I've seen the Panthers play live this year. Actually, one of the games I went to in Pittsburgh this year, the Panthers were playing the Penguins, and this matchup's going to be awesome. But I think Edmonton overall just their top players are better than Florida's. Their top 2 lines in their offense are way better, and their depth has been pretty solid as a team, and their defensemen have been playing good defense. I think it's just going to be up to whichever goalie is better out of the 2 teams will end up winning the Stanley Cup. But it's going to be energy. It's all going to be energy.
That's a hell of a preview right there, Barry. I mean, definitely broke it down.
That's why he's the smart one of the bunch here.
Well, I'm gonna go.
It's so funny because he's got it all in his head, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I have it all in front of me on a computer screen. He's got it all in his head.
I can vouch for that for myself because I'm over here looking at the sides of the screens. I'm like, okay, who do I have here? I know one guy on both teams, and that's Connor McDavid. I don't know anybody else on that. But Barry, if we're looking at matchups for Florida and Edmonton, if you had to zone in on one matchup, whether it be McDavid against somebody, what's that one matchup going into this series that a lot of fans are going to be looking forward to? Or like I said, people that want to watch out when they're watching the game, what they want to kind of watch out for? Is there a particular rivalry going on in this matchup to where fans are going to be like, I'm going to be dialed into these 2 guys?
Well, I think if you want to talk about rivalry, of course, because they're in different conferences, so they only play each other twice a year. But there's players on the Florida Panthers that used to play for the Calgary Flames, who are the Edmonton Oilers' arch rivals, and one of the biggest arch rivals and one of the biggest nemesis of the Edmonton Oilers in the past has been Matthew Tkachuk, who has been in Florida now a couple of years, and he's not the captain of the team, but he's definitely one of the leaders. I think that if you look at how teams are trying to play against the Oilers, and specifically Connor McDavid, they're trying to. They're not going to stop him. They're just trying to slow him down. And of the teams that the Oilers have played, the Kings, the Canucks, and the Dallas Stars, I think Florida will have a better shot, not just one guy, but they're going to have to rely on a couple of 2-3 guys to try to slow him down. Maybe, you can't stop him. You can hope to slow him down. But then if you worry too much about Connor McDavid, you got other guys on the team like Leon Draisaitl and Zach Hyman and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins who can do. So you ask for a specific matchup. I think you're going to see, like Carson said, it's going to be a physical series, but it's the Matthew Tkachuk, former Calgary Flame, that is going to be really up for this battle because he's looking for his first Stanley Cup, and he wants to win it against Edmonton because it was such a rivalry when he was in Calgary.
That would be a good one to watch there. And I guess with you back at Barrie, does Florida have any possible chance in this matchup?
Like Carson was saying, there's no real favorite. The Florida Panthers have home ice advantage because they had more points during the regular season than the Oilers did, and they won their division. When you look at it on paper, both teams are really even in just about every offensive and defensive category. What it's going to come down to, Rudy, and Carson and I mentioned it on the podcast, the Best Boy Center Ice podcast, which you can catch on Facebook as well. We'll be covering the Stanley Cup Finals, just saying. But you look at it and it's pretty even right down the middle. So there's no what's going to happen, and Carson and I have mentioned it, it's going to come down to your special teams, the power play and the penalty kill, which for both teams is pretty close. The Oilers have the advantage a little bit in the power play and the penalty kill, but it is pretty close. And it's going to come down to that, and it's going to come down to who can make the fewest mistakes, who can not give up the puck and not turn it over. Much like in basketball, if you turn it over a lot, you probably aren't going to win. So that's the way you got to look at it too. If you turn the puck over a lot, and you're probably not going to win. So I can't. I'm, of course, my heart and my head say the Edmonton Oilers, but that's a really good team in Florida. They made the Stanley Cup Final last year, so they've got all those. Pretty much everybody on that team has played in the Stanley Cup Final in that atmosphere, where the Oilers really only have like a handful of like 4 or 5 guys, and only one guy who's actually won the Stanley Cup, and that's Corey Perry.
Okay. And that, again, I love all this info because it's for guys like myself. And FYI, Carson should be back in a minute. I think we kind of lost him there, but he'll be back in a second for those that are wondering. But for guys like me who, when I say recreational, I basically was a San Antonio Rampage fan. I loved going to the games. I got my mom, my wife, my daughter. We all loved going to them. Unfortunately, they're located in Vegas now. So, I was kind of getting my groove back in the NHL scene, but for guys like us, I love the previews that you and Carson are giving us because now it gives me more going into the Stanley Cup. I know what kind of I'm watching for. I know players that I need to watch out for. I know a little bit about the history now that you mentioned about Calgary being involved, some of the players from Calgary who played there. That's another thing that I'm looking forward to on something like that. So appreciate you giving us a whole lot of info because, again, the thing with this is that we're trying to get a lot of people who don't really know much about NHL, get them previewed for the Stanley Cup. It's a big event here. I've actually got questions when it comes to hockey in general. But before we get to all that, Carson, we were talking about rivals with your dad here. He was mentioning a couple of players here. I know if I was to ask you a question, because people may not know that not only am I a bowler, you're a bowler too. So we've competed against each other as well. So
and
go ahead.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I've been on the air here in the San Antonio area and radio for almost 30 years, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm more noted for being Carson Besse's dad than anything. Anywhere in San Antonio you go, I say, yeah, I'm Barry Besse. Oh, are you Carson Besse's dad? Yes, I am. And it's because he's such a really an amazing bowler. Yeah. I'm going to brag on him. Sophomore year of high school, he was second in state. So he won't brag on himself, but I sure will.
Well, I can attest to that and say that I've had my butt handed to me a couple of times by your son on the lane. So I know definitely how good he is. We got some people in here, Day One Bags. It's my cousin's business. I'm not sure on that one. Let's see what's going on in the NHL world. Yeah, thanks for everybody tuning in. Sweep the League, NHL Stanley Cup edition here, getting you guys ready for the Stanley Cup, Lord Stanley Cups edition here. Appreciate you. But Carson, I'm getting back to you on this. So comparing it to, the likes of what the rivals that your dad was talking about, kind of like the storylines as well, some of the backstory on that. Yeah. I mentioned Florida. You said both teams have a chance. I mean, Florida has a chance to win the Stanley Cup. It's going to be hard-nosed, play by them. It seems like Edmonton has a little bit of an advantage when it comes to stars, per se. So is it going to take – this is what I'm looking at. Is it going to take a certain mistake by Edmonton to happen in order for Florida to get that advantage?
So the biggest difference in this series – the biggest advantage in the series really, I think, belongs to Florida, and the most key aspect of them all, and it's the goaltending. Florida's got Sergei Bobrovsky in the goal, who's an NHL veteran. He's played in the league for over 10 years. He's a very solid goalie. Over his career, he's just gotten better and better and better, and he is by far the better goalie out of the two. Stuart Skinner, who's in net for Edmonton, has shown at points that he can be very good, but he's also shown at many points that he can be very inconsistent. So it's a matter of that, how Edmonton containment. Edmonton can help Stuart Skinner out defensively where he doesn't really get tested too much, and when he does, he's able to stop the pucks. Then Edmonton's got the advantage. But I mean, this matchup wasn't precedented. I didn't see the matchup happening in the final. I don't know if Dad mentioned any of these kind of neat little I mentioned, but so this Stanley Cup final is the furthest geographic distance in Stanley Cup final history, 2,700 miles between cities. And so that hasn't been far ever in the history of the league. And also the two coaches coaching these teams are very different. Paul Maurice, who's coaching the Florida Panthers, has coached almost 1,900 NHL games in his career. Chris Knobloch, who coaches the Oilers right now, has coached 62 games. And so that's also the furthest distance between. Going back to the question, differences in goaltending. Truly, if Florida can find a way to contain McDavid and their top players, it's going to be tougher for Edmonton because I think depth-wise, Florida has better scorers down the lineup. But, I mean, if McDavid's able to do McDavid things, which he has all postseason, the Oilers are going to be fine. They've also got, out of the top 5 point scorers so far, the points are kind of confusing, but they match up just points or goals and assists together as points. So if a player has like 10 goals, 10 assists, he has 20 combined points. And in the playoffs, Edmonton has 4 out of the top 5 point scorers on their team.
Wow,
in the whole, that's all teams wide in the playoffs.
Wow.
But I mean, Florida, up and down the lineup, Florida's got more scoring consistency as far as like bottom players, even off at Edmonton's. But I still think Edmonton they can just keep Stewart's held down a little bit, and he's play the way he did. Yeah, Dallas, because he left 3 stars. He only allowed 4 goals in the last 3. Very good. So they'll have a very good chance playing that way.
Yeah, man. So again, listen to the Best Boys podcast. It's Carson and his dad, Barry. Great podcast. All your NHL coverage, especially for Stanley Cup coverage, you're going to get it from these guys. You can find them across social media. Just search Best Boys podcast. It's definitely going to be an interesting series. And it's weird because Gio mentioned it earlier, and he's like, it's weird because hockey's one of those sports where you kind of catch it from time to time, but when it's Stanley Cup time is when everybody tunes in. And that's kind of what I've kind of come to acclimate it as well. It's kind of like MLB. When the playoffs start, that's when everybody tunes in.
Yeah, and I'm not even biased when I'm saying this, but honestly, entertainment value is the most playoff format. There's no predictable matchups. You might be able to go into series and say this guy's the favorite, and it doesn't work out that way. The last time, actually, Edmonton Stanley Cup final in 2006, Carolina, they were the 8th seed, and they marched all the way up to the Stanley Cup final and barely lost. But you can't predict it. The last time even a number 1 seed has won the cup has been over about 10 years, maybe more. So you can't predict these matchups. I mean, the games are always great. Sometimes they are long, double, triple, but the value definitely NHL is the best playoff format and entertainment I've seen in any of the sport playoffs.
Yeah, it seems like it's almost like NCAA March Madness, where it's pretty much any team can win. That's kind of what I'm getting from the NHL playoffs here. All right, guys, appreciate you coming on, but I've got some, I'm going to take a quick commercial break, about 30 seconds or so. When we come back, I'm going to break down the NHL in general with Barry and Carson, because being that I'm an NHL newbie, basically, I've got questions of my own, and finally I get to ask somebody this and kind of, break the ice per se in my NHL world. It says Rudy Campos Jr. sweep the league. Carson, Barry, we will be right back, guys.
Hey, this is George Iceman Gervin, and you're listening to Sweet Women Radio.
All right, guys, welcome back to Sweep the League. It's Rudy Campos Jr. We're joined by Barry and Carson of the Best Boys podcast. Catch it all over social media. It's a great NHL podcast. Need all your NHL news, info, everything you need NHL. Follow these two guys. They're 100% great. So I've got these questions, Barry, and I'm going to go to you on the first one here. I got this massive question. It seems like we get through the Stanley Cup. You crown a champion. I'm sitting on my couch and I turn on SportsCenter. I feel like 3 weeks later and hockey's back on. Is there ever a set schedule with hockey? I mean, it just seems like the offseason goes like this and then hockey's back on the TV.
Well, when you look at it, the Stanley Cup finals usually will end in about mid-June, right? And then you go into probably a month later or so, you get into the NHL draft. So that'll happen. And then all of a sudden, training camps will probably start up again in like September. So when you talk about, SportsCenter, which is nice nowadays as compared to 20 years ago, the only time you heard about hockey was during the Stanley Cup finals. And then you didn't hear about hockey very much. But you want to talk about the wide scope of the role of the National Hockey League or hockey in general. Take a look at around social media. Take a look at the other 3 major sports in North America: Major League Baseball, the National Football League, the NBA, and talk to some of the players, some of the commentators. And you got guys like Charles Barkley and Shaquille O'Neal who are invested in watching the NHL playoffs. You've got Jason and the Kelseys on the New Heights podcast, right? You've got them talking about the Stanley Cup. you take a look at, we went to Dallas for game 3, game 2. Carson and I went to Dallas for the Western Conference Final game 2. And, there's Dallas Cowboys are there. Travis Kelce was there. So hockey has caught on in the last few years. And I've always said I compared hockey a lot in the speed to basketball because it was up and down, up and down, up and down. But to me, I think hockey, and I guess maybe speaking from a biased point of view, is really coming up as not just the bottom tier of the 4 major sports in the United States or North America, but it's coming right up there. Now, if you were to go across the border, north of the border, it's hockey all year round.
Yeah.
Like even in the off season, on shows like yours, Rudy, like Sweep the League, they're still talking hockey. Like if you're watching any of the playoffs, the conference finals, and you see in Edmonton, for example, during even when Edmonton were playing in Dallas, the arena that the Oilers play in, Rogers Place, was full of fans, and there was no game on; it was on the screen. And even during the game in Edmonton, people are outside in what's called the mosh pit, which is just a place to watch the game outside. And it's just crazy. There's a different aspect of fandom in Canada when it comes to hockey. But here in the United States, and especially here in the southern part of the United States, and yes, Carson and I both missed the Rampage too, because we saw so many games. I was involved with the Rampage when they first started doing the radio broadcast for, I'll say it, Ticket 760. And I was a part of that. And you could see, and even back, I don't know how long ago you remember, Rudy, but the old San Antonio Iguanas hockey team, when I first moved down here in 95, and I got a chance to work with the Iguanas as an off-ice official, the old Freeman Coliseum was full. Mm-hmm. Every night, and it was not a big building, but it was full every night. In the atmosphere, you could tell that hockey, and Carson has mentioned this too, hockey belongs here in South Texas. We went up to Dallas, and the Stars have been around since the mid-'90s in Dallas. They used to be the Minnesota North Stars, mm-hmm. and they've won a cup in '99, same year that the Spurs won their first NBA championship. And you could see that the atmosphere there, it's not just the Cowboys in Dallas. It's not the Texas Rangers, it's not just the Mavericks. I think the Dallas Stars have a huge population of that Dallas metropolitan area. I think they're ahead of some of the other teams in the Dallas area. So hockey is just really, and it's just something and we talked about it on the podcast before, if you can get up to Austin has a great hockey team, the AHL affiliate of the Dallas Stars. You can go up to Austin, and we'd love to, and actually, some things are happening with UTSA is they're going to have a hockey program in the fall. Oh, so, and I'm the guy down here in the corner here, he's going to be part of it too. And so hockey is just, you got to go see it live. And then you may not understand it, Rudy, but you go see it live, and you've seen Rampage games. It's just the atmosphere is just something else.
So when my mom, I remember telling her, look, Mom, let's go to a Rampage game. I've been to a couple. I enjoyed it. I loved it. You're right. Seeing it live, it does no justice like we've seen it live. It's amazing. So she was kind of like, okay, I don't know if I like hockey, but let me try it. The first night she went, she fell in love with it. And then the next game I took her to was during the Chimuelos, when they would do the Chimuelos nights where they had those types of jerseys and stuff. When she left that, that time, it was at the AT&T Center at the time. When she left, she was talking about season tickets. And I'm like, wow. This woman never bought a season ticket to anything, period. She cringed at the fact of buying season tickets for SeaWorld. I mean, here she is talking about season tickets to the Rampage, and I'm like, okay, she loved it. So when they left, she was so heartbroken, and I'm like, I said, I think there's a team in Austin, which now you've confirmed there is a team in Austin. So we may take up a game in Austin, kind of get her back into the hockey group. But I agree 100%, man. Hockey in San Antonio has been huge and massive. I mean, from the Iguanas to the Rampage.
And it's funny how it's developed from the Iguanas, where I was there and people were there to see fights. Really, they were there to see fights. And then as we evolved from the Iguanas into even the San Antonio Dragons of the IHL into the San Antonio Rampage, the hockey knowledge of people around here has gotten better and more and more and more. Where I would used to sit in the stands and try to have to explain to people what was going on the ice, the people behind me were explaining to other people what was going on to the ice. So, I would love, and Carson too would love to see, another hockey franchise down here in San Antonio. The Texas Stars are not that far away, and when you're talking about the AHL, you're talking about the guys that are the next level up from the National Hockey League.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely I think it's gonna come back to San Antonio again. Not in anytime soon, but I think in the distant future we probably will get hockey back in San Antonio. It's got to happen, man. We need another team in Texas. We need another team here. I mean, I love this.
Well, there's always we've heard a lot of talk about possible NHL franchise in Houston. Houston used to have a great AHL franchise in the Arrows, and even and that goes back to the WHA days too, in the 70s, where the Arrows were. So hockey in Texas works. We know it works in Dallas. We know it works in San Antonio. It's just we got to bring it back.
Yeah, let me. I'm gonna go to Carson on this one because again, I'm trying to get myself acclimated with NHL hockey because I want to sit there. I want to watch it. What I loved about NHL a few years back, and I don't know if they do it anymore, but it was so hard to follow the puck. They used to have the red line just following everything. That had to drive. Did that drive you crazy back in the day?
Oh yeah, I did. It's like sometimes the dot would be in the stands because if it comes along the boards on this side, it'd be in the stands. Yeah.
So I guess Carson, as far as NHL goes, now, if you can give me just a summary of the rules, I've heard people say it's got a little bit of soccer in it because of offsides. It's got a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then also I want to ask you after that, just give us a basic rundown of the rules. Fights in hockey. I've seen some people say that those things are scripted to happen way before they even do. So we're gonna get a little bit of wrestling involved in that. But first, break down the rules for hockey. If you're looking at a hockey game, what do we need to know going into the Stanley Cup and even NHL in general? What's the basic rules for hockey, man?
Yeah. Okay, so the one that's the most soccer-like is the offsides rule. Mm-hmm. So like in soccer, you be in the box with alone before the ball gets to you. The ball has to precede the player. Yeah. Same thing works in hockey. So if you've seen the hockey rink, you see that there are two blue lines, one on each side of the rink. Yeah. And that marks each offensive zone for each team. And so it's the same thing where the player can't precede the puck. So a player can't be behind the blue line, that's the offensive team, before they get the puck. Otherwise, it's offside. So that happens quite a bit during a game. Probably a game, I bet you happens 15, 20 times a game. Probably.
Does it happen more than icing?
I don't think so. I think icing happens more often. But the icing is probably the most common rule, which is behind the center line, that red line that's right in the middle of the ice. You can't be behind it and shoot it into your defensive zone or into your offensive zone without somebody else touching it on your team because it's delaying the game pretty much. Mm-hmm. They didn't have the icing rule where it stops the game like that. You could just do that all game long and the game wouldn't stop and it'd be nothing would be happening. Yeah. But the thing with the icing is, so let's take into example these two. The Edmonton Oilers ice the puck. You can't substitute players. Mm-hmm. So sometimes players can be out there for a minute and a half, 2 minutes at a time on their shift which I'll get into the shifts as well. But they can be out there for that long, and they're dead tired, and they ice the puck. They can't get off the ice. They're stuck. They're
Wow.
very strategic because, again, unlike football and basketball, that the substitutions happen at whistles.
Yeah.
These substitutions happen on the fly during the game. So you strategically have to kind of place it to where you're in the least amount of danger to change your players, which is typically when players cross that red line and dump the puck into their offensive zone, so that way they can change their guys off and they're not in danger of getting scored on. Because the changes do happen pretty fast. The players are ready to jump on and they know who's going and who's jumping off.
Yeah.
Those are definitely the biggest rules to notice. One that's hard to follow and understand is the hand pass rule. So you can't pass the puck with your hand to somebody else on your team. Now,
You can knock it down, though.
you can catch it and put it down yourself.
Yeah.
You can't, I could grab it like this and put it down. Like, that's it. But I can't grab it and toss it or hit it to somebody else. I have to put it down to myself, and that's that. So sometimes that'll happen where a player will pass it off with their hand to somebody else, and they just blow it dead, and the play starts again with the face-off, one
face-off.
battle for the puck. Those are really the biggest rules. Some things that can be hard to follow are the penalties that happen during the game. Instead of football, they penalize you by yardage. Hockey, they penalize you by losing a man. So you lose a guy on your team, the penalty, and it's either 2 minutes or it could be 5 minutes, depending on what the penalty is. Most commonly, it's just a 2-minute penalty. But if you get scored on, then the penalty ends, and your guy comes out of the box in the pit of shame because he's just allowed his team to get scored on pretty much.
Man, I was going to tell you, I've always wanted to sit next to the penalty box. That was a dream of mine, but I could never get tickets next to the penalty box at the Rampage.
That'd probably be a pretty thing. And even then, the fights aspect of the game. The fights, this year, I think, were a lot more publicized this year. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of good fights in the league, and as far as them being scripted, they're honestly really not. The furthest that they can go back with, maybe something earlier in the game happens. Sometimes like a dirty hit will happen. One team commits a dirty hit, and they know they know the player that committed the hit, and later during the game for retribution, they go out and they'll fight because for payback. Okay. I'm not letting that happen to my team. Most of the time, it's just on the fly. Both go together and okay, let's go, let's fight. Do it.
Now, there are some times where, there are times where you get a couple of players and they've been jawing at each other for a while, and they'll be in the face-off circle, and if they happen to be mic'd up, you'll hear them go, okay, you want to go? And they said, well, yeah, okay, let's go. And then, so they'll kind of decide there before, because you can't fight until the puck is dropped, where you'll see a lot of times, as soon as the puck is dropped, these guys will start fighting. So there's a lot of times where these guys are chirping at each other, and then they'll go, you want to go, and then they'll get together, and it's almost like, okay, we're gonna do this, right? Yeah, we're gonna do this. So it's not quite WWE scripted, but these guys, and there's just sometimes where it just happens because a hard hit or stuff like that. But I love it when these guys are looking at each other going, you want to go? Yeah, I want to go. Okay, well, let's go now. You want to go in the second period? It's so they're going to fight. And I think, people have been talking about years taking fighting out of hockey. But I don't think that's right, because if you take fighting out of hockey, you got a stick in your hands that these guys could use. I'd rather see them go duke it out. Exactly. And not use the stick as much.
Exactly, yeah.
And honestly, so this year, if you have time, whenever you have the time, look up on YouTube. Earlier this year, actually, it was only a couple months ago, there was a big fight that happened between the New York Rangers and the New Jersey Devils. This was in, I think, March. Mm-hmm. And so 5 players on each side and then the 2 goalies. As soon as the game started, they dropped the puck. 2 seconds into the game, all 5 players from each side are fighting each other. All 5 of them.
Oh my God, so that's awesome.
Over the six lasted a few minutes. It took forever to get the penalties sorted out. But yeah, the fights aren't WWE scripted, but there can be over game occurrences that are okay, little dirty things are going on, or they're yapping at each other, okay, let's settle this, because to settle it once and for all, they take the 5 minutes sitting down in the penalty box and they get put back in the game.
Yeah, and I love it because it's the refs are just there, they're gonna fight. Then when they go down, one goes down, then obviously it's over. But it seems
if you want to see some of the best fights, go on YouTube, like Carson says, and just search goalie fights. The fights between the goaltenders are the best.
I can't imagine they have all that equipment on.
All that equipment, yeah.
I mean, it's like something like that or something.
I've seen some really doozy. There's one that's a really good one. If you want to check it out, it was between the Oilers and the Calgary Flames, between Mike Smith, the goaltender for the Oilers, and Cam Talbot, who used to be a goaltender for the Oilers, who was a goaltender for Calgary. They had one of the best goalie fights I've ever seen.
I'm going to check it out. I'm actually going to message you and say, hey, message me these fights so I can kind of look them up and see.
And you know what? And the inside hockey, each jersey that the players wear have what's called fighting straps, because it used to be that the guys would take the jersey and pull it over their head and then beat the heck out of them, right? Well, they didn't want that to happen so much, so they had these straps on your back part of your jersey that connect to your pants, so you can't pull the jersey over as easy. So Carson and I have a couple of jerseys that actually have fighting straps on them because they're authentic. So yeah, they have to put those in here.
You and Carson don't fight like that, right? I'm just making sure.
No, because he's 6'5", I'm 6'1". He just over top of me like that. He just puts me in a headlock and then that's it. Or he just takes my leg away and then I can't, I got a prosthetic leg. I can't do anything. I just got to sit there.
So he plays the smart card when he does that. He's
smart.
We're talking to Carson and Barry of the Besse podcast. Catch it everywhere on social media for all your NHL needs, especially with Stanley Cup coming up here. I went over the rules with Carson, man, and I'm sitting here thinking, you know what? I've seen Mighty Ducks 1, 2, and 3. I know the rules of hockey. It's not that bad. I learned a whole lot, man. I learned a whole lot, especially considering a lot of these rules, because you don't see a lot of these happen in the movies, obviously. And that's pretty much my experience, other than Rampage games where I'm sitting there. And one thing I do notice is that when penalties are called, normally you see one of the refs with their hands up, and then when it's dead, basically they're, I guess, the icing or something, that's when the penalty occurs. They call the penalty.
Well, when the referee puts his arm up with the red armband, when the referee puts his arm up, that's the indication that a penalty is coming. The only time the play stops is when the team who is going to be penalized touches the puck, because the team that's not penalized pull their goaltender out and get a 6-on-5 advantage until the other team can touch the puck. So there's some times where the referee puts up his hand, the goaltender for the team that's not getting the penalty goes to the bench, and they have a 6-on-5 for like a minute and a half before the other team touches the puck, and then there's a 2-minute penalty. So it just gives the team that's going to get the power play a little bit more of an advantage.
There you go. See, I don't know this stuff, and now I feel like I'm somewhat of an expert. I can bust out my old Nintendo and play that. Well, I can't remember that hockey game that was on the old original Nintendo.
Well, I used to have Sega, and it was NHL '95. It's nothing like what they have now. The 2Ks, nothing. Yeah. It's like you're watching an actual game. And sometimes when I see stuff online, and I'm going, "Oh wait, that's not an actual game. That's actually an Xbox or P5 or whatever." So yeah, it's pretty advanced now.
I know it was. I would think it was just called ice hockey. Is what it was on the old Nintendo. Kind
of like the old Tecmo Bowl, where if you got Bo Jackson, you were guaranteed to get touchdowns all the time.
I remember that. I remember the old Tecmo Bowl. Carson's probably looking at us like, I don't know what the hell y'all.
You go what?
Nintendo. I mean, honestly, Carson, if your dad and I could have played hockey on Atari, we would have played hockey on Atari. That's how old.
That's how old we are,
man. And actually, I'm Commodore 64 old. I'm way older. That's big time old.
Man, yeah.
Yeah, that's horrible, man. I'm bringing up this stuff here. Carson's going to bounce out of here like these old guys. I can't talk to these guys anymore. But, man, if anything, we're going to end the show here with this. I want some previews. I want your prediction for Stanley Cup. I'm going to go first. You know what? I'm going to go with the Panthers. I don't know why. I'm just going to go with Florida Panthers. Not that I don't want Edmonton to win, because I love you, Barry. You're a good friend of mine. I know you're an Edmonton fan. I'm pretty sure Edmonton's going to win the series, but I'm going to go with the underdog Florida. And it's 7 games, right? It's 7-game series. Yep. So I say Florida in 7. I think it's going to go the full 7 games. That's my prediction. Let's go around the horn before we end this show. Barry, give me your prediction for Edmonton and Florida.
You got the pick.
Okay. Carson and I did this on the podcast a couple nights ago. Of course, like I said, I'm an Edmontonian. I was born about 6 hours away from Edmonton, but I grew up for my teenage years until we moved down to Texas, a half hour out of Edmonton in a small town called Wetaskiwin. I got to see these guys win and hoist the cup 5 times. Got to go to many, many games at the old Northlands Coliseum, and they had some down times in the 90s, in the 2000s, and even in the 2010s. They just came so close in 2006 to winning the cup against Carolina in Game 7. Getting another generational player like Connor McDavid, and another guy to go along with him, and Leon Draisaitl, and just how watching this team grow. And this year, watching this team start the season at 2 wins, 9 losses, and a tie when they were supposed to win the Pacific Division and go on to the Stanley Cup. And they had to literally crawl out from the basement. There's 32 teams in the National Hockey League. They were the 31st team in November, and now they're playing for the Stanley Cup. I am, of course, and like you can talk my head, my heart, everything is I just been going for the Edmonton Oilers. Florida Panthers is a great team. I don't dislike Florida. Even though, Matthew Tkachuk was a Calgary Flame, and there was many, many battles of Alberta between the two teams, that he was a pain in my side. But I love Sergei Bobrovsky, the goaltender. I love the coach, but I really think that when it comes right down to it, watching the Dallas series with the Oilers, watching them play, the Vancouver Canucks, and in the second round, I just think the Oilers are on a roll, and it's destiny. It's been 34 years since the Oilers have won a Stanley Cup. The last time a Canadian team won the Stanley Cup was in 1993 when the Montreal Canadiens won the Stanley Cup. There's been teams that have made the Stanley Cup. The Canadiens made the Stanley Cup a couple of years ago. The Vancouver Canucks made it in 2011, but it's been a long, long time since the Canadian team has hoisted the Stanley Cup. I'm going with the Edmonton Oilers. On paper, the teams are pretty even. It's just going to come down, like we said earlier, Rudy, mistakes and the special teams, and then also I'm going to give you my the MVP of the playoffs is called the Conn Smythe Trophy winner. And much like the NBA Finals MVP, I'm going to put this out. I think that Leon Draisaitl, who is it's easy pick for McDavid because he is the greatest player in the league. I'm going with Leon Draisaitl to win the MVP of the Stanley Cup playoffs.
There you go. Straight from the mouth himself, Barry over here. So he's taking Edmonton. I think Carson mentioned earlier who he's taking, but we'll let him repeat it here for this segment.
Thinking with my heart, I got Edmonton winning in 6 games, but with my head, it's hard to see Florida losing this series because I just think the goaltending is better. And so I don't know if Dad mentioned this while I was away for a couple of seconds with my phone, but the Panthers made the Cup final last year. So this is their second straight Cup final appearance, and last year's Cup final was one of the worst ever. Honestly, it was so boring, and even the Cup clinching game last year, Game 5, when the Vegas Golden Knights won the Cup, they beat the Panthers 9-3. So it was a close game. It's hard for me to see Florida losing twice in a row in the finals, but I think my heart outweighs my head. I got Edmonton winning in 6 games. I think they're going to win at home. Connor McDavid, who's their superstar player, has done everything in this league and won just about every award you can win besides the Stanley Cup. Once he wins the Stanley Cup, he's for sure cemented Hall of Fame legacy, and as well as being one of those generation players who win a Stanley Cup, like Gretzky's, Lemieux's, Crosby's, Ovechkin's that have won a Stanley Cup, and he will be a part of that special group with winning this. So I think, I'm going to take my heart over my head that the Oilers are going to win the series.
Well, I hope I didn't jinx you guys because I'm sorry. I went with Florida.
You know what? This is going to be just a fantastic series. I think it's going to be one of the best Stanley Cup finals we've had in a long time. It's going to be only one team can win the Stanley Cup.
Yeah.
There's 32 teams that at the beginning of the year, they want to win the Stanley Cup. It's down to 2. And it's going to be just the better team on that day will win the game. It's just you know what, Carson and I had talked about this before. We're not just Edmonton Oilers fans, and I don't know if we have time, but Carson's story about how he became a Pittsburgh Penguins fan is pretty cool. We're not just an Edmonton Oilers fan and a Pittsburgh Penguins fan, but we're hockey fans, and we just like seeing the game of hockey and seeing a great game. And this is going to be a really, really great series between two of the best teams in hockey right now.
100%.
Gotcha, man. Hey, y'all previewed the hell out of this series, and I'm actually more excited to watch it now than I was going, before we started talking here. So now I kind of got a little bit of insight on him, and I remember Carson, his story. So I'll tell you what, when we come back in maybe about a week, I'll get you guys back on. I'm going to get Carson's story on his backstory on the hockey, how he became a hockey fan and all that. Cause it's cool. My dad was, my big sports guy, and I talked to certain players, I talked to certain people, and they're surprised, like, how do you know about this guy? How do you know about that guy? How did you become a fan of this team? It all goes back to him. So hearing the father and the son story talks and all that sports stuff, it's definitely appealing. It's definitely amazing to me. So I'll get you guys back. We'll get Carson's backstory on that because I'm dying to hear it. And I'll tell you what, we'll do it soon because Father's Day is around the corner. I'd love to do that for a Father's Day type.
Yeah, don't forget that, Carson. Father's Day is just around the corner.
Father's Day. So
I'll gift you a replica Stanley Cup.
Okay, that'll work. Yeah, that'll work.
Well, for Father's Day, we're gonna have to have y'all both through because I want to hear this story. But not only that, real quick, man, if I bowled against Carson in 50 games, I probably would end up losing 50, right? More than likely.
Well, at least Carson used to, when I first lost my leg, and I wanted to start doing some activities, Carson was my bowling coach. And I would do I couldn't go up to the approach and stuff like that. Dude would laugh at me. So at least he's not going to laugh at you but he'll laugh at me the whole time.
I think
Own it.
It was recently that I actually bowled, not against him, but I bowled against his team.
Yeah.
Tuesday night recently. And they kept giving me crap because I shot okay that night. I mean, it was.
Yeah, they did. I'm like.
Luckily, I think I was bowling against his second bowler that night. I don't think I was bowling Brandon.
I love watching Carson bowl. And not just because, he's my son, but he is by far one of the best bowlers. And everybody knows him. When we went to the state tournament that year, it was here in San Antonio. It was his sophomore year. And there were people from North Texas that knew who he was.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm proud to be known as Carson Besse's dad.
Yeah, that was my dad. When I moved to, my wife and we moved to Ohio for 2 years and walked into the bowling center in Eastern Lanes, Middletown, Ohio. And my wife's like, do you know anybody? I'm like, I know nobody here. I know a couple of people in Ohio, but I don't know anybody in this town. And sure enough, I go to the pro shop, Mark Moon's there. And, oh, yeah, I've heard Rudy. I'm like, wow, okay, I didn't think I was that popular. So my dad was the same way. He's kind of like, well, I'm a bowler, but I'm not that good of a bowler. So I'll just be your dad and I'll collect the bracket money whenever you win.
Yeah.
That was pretty much my dad's job.
Well, I should be doing that, Tar, getting your bracket money.
I'm sorry, Carson. I let the cat out of the bag.
You're good.
There was times my dad would walk into the tournament and, you'd have guys like, can I have your tournament action? I'm like, you got to talk to that guy.
Yeah.
That guy's the one that does it. So talk to him. But nonetheless, man, we're going to get you guys both on, especially before Father's Day. We do some NHL, more NHL talk. Probably get a few games into the Stanley Cup, get you guys back on for a preview, see how it's going, see if anything's changed. If there's any changes in the preview itself, we'll get you guys back on. But hey, I appreciate you boys joining me tonight on Sweep the League. And again, everybody out there, the Besse podcast, Besse Boys podcast across social media, especially on Facebook. Tune into it. It's great. It's going to get you guys up to date on hockey. Ask these guys anything. They're both very approachable, even though Barry made me nervous the first time I worked with him on radio. That's Shemaya's fault, not mine, not yours. That's
Shemaya's fault. Yes, it's Shemaya's fault.
He said, you're working with a legend. I said, who is that? He says, Barry. I'm like, thanks, Shemaya. You could have not told me anything. I would have been fine. So,
yeah, he propped me up a little too much.
No, I'm definitely not. But all right, guys, appreciate you joining on Sweep the League. And this is the end of Sweep the League, man. Again, we'll be back on Monday. We'll have some more NHL talk with Gio and Derek and everybody else, as well as some more NBA Finals talk. But appreciate you guys joining me tonight. It is hockey weekend. The start of the Stanley Cup is tomorrow. Guys, you have a great weekend. We will see you guys soon.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, really appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Bye.